What really happened to the German soldiers when the guns finally fell silent in May 1945? For 12 long years, the world had watched the Wehrmacht march across Europe, from the English Channel to the Volga, from the Arctic Circle to the Sahara. 6 million men had worn the Feldgrau. When the Reich surrendered unconditionally on the 8th of May 1945, more than 11 million German soldiers, sailors, and airmen laid down their arms, the largest mass surrender in history. Little did they know that, for millions of them, the war was only just beginning. This is the story of what came next, the shocking fate that history often leaves out. By the spring of 1945, the German armed forces were shattered. The once mighty Heer, Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe had been reduced to a patchwork of exhausted divisions, teenage Volkssturm battalions and foreign volunteers who now faced a terrible choice: surrender to the West or to the Red Army. In the East, Army Group Center, Army Group North, and the remnants of Army Group Vistula were encircled in Prussia, Courland, and Pomerania. In the West, Field Marshal Model's Army Group B was trapped in the Ruhr Pocket, while the 1st, 7th, and 19th Armies tried to reach American lines before the Soviets closed the ring. Every soldier knew the rumors. The Americans and British took prisoners. The Red Army took revenge. On the 16th of April, 1945, as Zhukov's First Belarusian Front launched the final assault on Berlin, the greatest exodus in military history began. By the 20th of April, more than 2 million German soldiers were streaming west along every road, railway, and forest track that led toward the Elbe River, the unofficial line between the Western Allies and the Red Army. Panzerfaust armed boys from the Hitler Youth marched beside grandfathers of the Volkssturm. Waffen-SS veterans from the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend mixed with Wehrmacht veterans who had survived Stalingrad. They carried whatever they could: Karabiner 98K. Rifles, a few MP40s, sometimes only a loaf of bread and a photograph of home. In the East, the temperature still dropped below freezing at night. In the West, spring rain turned the roads into mud. By April 25th, the ring was closing. Soviet T-34-85s of the 8th Guards Army were less than 40 kilometers from the Elbe. American spearheads of the 2nd Armored Division and the British 11th Armored Division waited on the western bank. For 3 brutal days, hundreds of thousands of Germans tried to cross the last bridges at Tangermund, Wittenberg, and Domitz. By April 30th, those bridges were gone, destroyed by Luftwaffe engineers on Himmler's orders to stop desertion. Hundreds of thousands were now trapped between 2 avenging armies. By May 2nd, Berlin had fallen. The same day, 1.8 million German soldiers in the East formally surrendered to the Red Army under Marshal Rokossovsky and Marshal Zhukov. Another 1.5 million laid down their arms to the Americans in Bavaria and Bohemia. What happened next would depend entirely on which flag flew over the surrender table. In the West, the Americans established gigantic Rheinwiesenlager open-air camps along the Rhine meadows. At Remagen, Sinzig, Andernach, and Bretzenheim, barbed wire enclosures stretched for miles. No barracks, no tents, only the spring sky and the muddy earth. Prisoners were classified in temporary PW enclosures. Officially, they were not yet prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention, a bureaucratic distinction that meant no Red Cross parcels, no shelter, no cooked food for weeks. By mid-May 1945, nearly 1 million men were held in these camps. Rain turned the ground into a quagmire. Dysentery and typhus spread rapidly. U.S. Army figures later admitted 3,000 to 10,000 deaths in the Rheinwiesenlager alone, numbers still disputed today. But west of the Elbe, most survived. East of the Elbe was another world. Between May and September 1945, approximately 3.3 million German soldiers entered Soviet captivity. The NKVD processed them in former concentration camps: Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, Auschwitz, now ringed with new barbed wire turned inward. Men were stripped of watches, wedding rings, and boots. Then the marches began. Columns of 25,000 prisoners, guarded by 1 submachine gun company, were force-marched 30 to 40 kilometers a day toward railheads. Those who fell were shot. At night, they slept in fields in temperatures as low as -55 degrees Celsius. In the first weeks, mortality reached 1 to 2% per day from exhaustion, starvation, and typhus. By the time the survivors reached the camps in Siberia, Kazakhstan, and the Urals, between 350,000 and 400,000 had already perished. In Camp 188 at Tambov, winter 1945-46, prisoners received 300 grams of bread and watery soup made from frozen cabbage. Temperatures fell to -42 degrees Celsius. Men burned their greatcoats to stay warm for one night, then froze the next. In Camp 27 at Vorkuta, above the Arctic Circle, prisoners mined coal 14 hours a day for 800 calories of food. The human cost was staggering. Of the 3.3 million taken prisoner by the Soviets, approximately 1.1 million never returned home. Yet even in the darkest camps, the human spirit refused to break entirely. In the Soviet Gulag system, German officers organized secret schools, mathematics taught with sticks in the snow, history whispered in barracks after lights out. Medics performed surgery with sharpened spoons and fishing line. In the American Rheinwiesenlager, Catholic and Protestant chaplains held open-air masses for 50,000 men at a time. Former enemies began to help. By autumn 1945, the Red Cross finally gained limited access. American Quakers and Swedish diplomats pressured Moscow and Washington alike. The first repatriations began in 1946. The sick, the under-18s, the over-50s. In 1947, under international pressure, Stalin ordered the release of 800,000 prisoners for the 30th anniversary of the October Revolution. By 1949, most Western POWs were home. The last Germans, those classified as war criminals by SMERSH, remained until 1955 and 1956. On October 6, 1955, Chancellor Konrad Adenauer flew to Moscow. After days of negotiation with Khrushchev, the last 10,000 prisoners, including many who had been boys in 1945, boarded trains at Frankfurt and Der Oder. When the train crossed into West Germany, grown men wept openly. Official Soviet statistics acknowledge 381,000 German POW deaths in captivity, a figure most Western historians consider far too low. Independent research places the true number between 600,000 and 1.1 million. In the Western camps, mortality was under 1%. More than 5 million German soldiers eventually returned home, scarred, silent, and forever changed. Many refused to speak of the years in captivity for the rest of their lives. Some received the irony of all ironies: former Wehrmacht soldiers drafted into the East German National Volksarmee, or the West German Bundeswehr wearing NATO uniforms. No Victoria Crosses, no Knights Crosses were awarded for what happened after the surrender. There were no victory parades for the prisoners who came home. Yet their survival remains one of the quietest triumphs of the human spirit in the entire Second World War. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Files as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.